A sharp crack of frozen branches echoed through the winter air as the golden and black German shepherd hurled herself toward the porch of an abandoned house. Her body trembled with panic, shielding the smaller gray shepherd behind her. Townspeople whispered the same word again and again. Dangerous. At that very moment, Ethan Cole, a former Navy SEAL who had lived in quiet isolation for years, stopped his truck in the middle of the snowy road. He never stopped for anything, but this time he cut the engine and stepped out into the cold. He didn't just see a frightened dog. He recognized something far deeper. It was the disciplined stance of a trained K9, the same look Ranger once had moments before saving Ethan's life. Loyalty, fear, duty, all written in her eyes. And in that instant, Ethan knew. These were not monsters. They were lost soldiers still guarding a home that no longer existed. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The winter air in Cold Haven, Montana, always carried the faint scent of pine sap and wood smoke. But on this gray morning the smell seemed sharper, as if the whole valley were holding its breath. Low clouds drifted across the mountains, brushing the snow-tipped evergreens while the wind whispered through town, rattling porch chimes and tugging loose shutters. Cold Haven was normally quiet. A few clapboard houses, one diner with warm yellow lights glowing through frosted windows, and a red brick elementary school watching the forest like a patient guardian. But lately that calm had stiffened into tension. People spoke more softly, doors locked sooner, and children no longer walked home alone. The first real encounter happened when Tom Walker, the school's janitor, saw them. Tom was in his late 50s, tall but slightly hunched from years of work, with gray hair tucked under a faded baseball cap and a tired kindness in his face. His wife had died 10 years prior, and loneliness had quietly shaped him into a cautious man. One evening, while locking the school doors, he spotted two large shadows moving near the tree line. They stepped out into the dim light, two German shepherds. One, a female with a golden black coat and alert amber eyes, stood tense and ready to retreat. The other, younger, gray-flecked and uncertain, stayed close behind her. Tom froze, heart racing, then hurried inside, locking the doors with trembling hands. By morning, the story had traveled through town like wildfire, reshaped, exaggerated, and whispered over coffee cups and grocery bags. In Cold Haven, gossip was as natural as breathing. Soon the two dogs weren't simply strays. They were threats. Parents warned their children, stay away from the woods, stay close to the school, stay safe. The sheriff monitored the situation. Fear grew roots in the snow, but someone saw differently. Anna Miller, 32, a second-grade teacher, watched the tree line with thoughtful eyes. Anna was small and slim, with long chestnut hair and soft hazel eyes that always seemed to hold compassion. She carried a gentle sadness. Years ago, her father had died suddenly in a road accident, teaching her how fragile life could be. Instead of turning cold, grief had made her kinder. She had grown up on a small farm surrounded by animals, and she had learned to recognize the difference between anger and fear. And when she caught sight of the dogs again, her heart whispered, "They're scared." One afternoon, wrapped in a beige wool coat and faded blue scarf, Anna lingered near the playground. The wind tugged her hair, and the sky hung heavy with pale clouds. Then, like shadows stepping from another world, the dogs reappeared. The older female, Luna, though Anna did not yet know the name, stood protectively in front, tail low, posture guarded. The younger male, Scout, hovered behind her, still carrying the softness of youth and a faint limp in one hind leg. They did not stalk. They simply watched. For one fragile moment, Anna's eyes met Luna's. She expected to see hostility, wild hunger, or threat. Instead, she saw panic wrapped in loyalty, as if Luna existed only to protect the trembling soul behind her. Scout looked like a child hiding behind his mother. Anna's breath tightened. These were not villains. These were survivors. Behind her came the steady voice of Principal Howard Jensen. Howard, a man in his early 50s with a solid build and a salt and pepper mustache, lived in a constant state of practical responsibility. Years of running the school had carved seriousness into his expression. "Anna," he said, gentle but firm, "inside, those dogs are back." She hesitated, then replied softly, "They're frightened, not dangerous." Howard sighed, the sound of a man who didn't want risks. "Frightened animals are dangerous. Please." She obeyed, but she left a part of herself standing among the pines. That night, the fear sharpened inside Marlene's diner, where locals gathered like migrating birds. Marlene Briggs, the stout, blonde-haired owner with a booming voice and a fiercely protective heart, hardened years ago by losing her family farm to wildfire, was certain of danger. "I heard they chased a boy down Main Street," she announced. The truth was much smaller. The boy had dropped his sandwich and Scout had followed the smell. But fear edits reality. Sitting quietly at the counter was Sheriff Dale Harper, a tall, wiry man with steady blue eyes and a face weathered like old leather. He lived carefully, not ruled by panic, but aware of how quickly it could spread. "We're monitoring," he said calmly. It didn't matter. Panic was already unpacking its bags. Soon every noise became proof. Rustling trash? The dogs? A distant bark? A threat? A deer carcass? Clearly their doing. Cold Haven didn't see animals anymore. It saw danger wearing fur. Meanwhile, Anna found herself watching from the edges of life. After school, from her car, from the corner of the playground. She saw things others didn't. Luna always shielding Scout. Scout walking with a faint limp. Neither dog approaching unless cornered. Fear, not aggression, shaped their every step. Then the school district issued a new rule. No children walking home alone. The laughter of recess shrank. The world tightened. Life felt smaller. Anna sat at her desk after class, the scent of crayons filling the quiet room, and knew with painful certainty the town had misjudged them. And although she didn't yet know how, she also knew she could not stay silent. Somewhere beneath the whispering pines, two frightened dogs curled into each other against the cold, the world mistaking their fear for fury. And only Anna saw the truth in their eyes. The wind moved steadily across the pines that bordered the northern edge of Cold Haven, carrying the metallic scent of snow waiting to fall. Beyond the last row of houses, where the town surrendered to wilderness, a narrow dirt road wound toward a small wooden cabin tucked into the trees. This was where Ethan Cole had made his home. Ethan was 48 years old, tall and broad-shouldered in the way soldiers often are, even years after service. His hair was dark brown, streaked with gray at the temples, kept short more out of habit than vanity. A trimmed beard framed a face lined by weather and memory, the kind of face that had seen too much and chosen silence over explanation. He wore layered clothes built more for endurance than style, a flannel shirt in faded red and navy, a heavy brown leather jacket scarred at the seams, worn jeans and old boots whose leather had softened with years of use. Ethan had once been a Navy SEAL, a career carved from discipline, loyalty, and quiet sacrifice. But years earlier, when combat ended for him, something inside had not ended at all. He had stepped back from the world, preferring the company of wind and trees to voices and noise, and Cold Haven had accepted him as another roomer in the woods, rather than a neighbor. He did not live alone, though. At his side almost always moved Ranger, a male German shepherd of powerful build, with thick dark fur streaked in gray along his muzzle. Ranger was older now, his movements dignified, but slower than before. His brown eyes held both intelligence and calm, the practiced awareness of a retired working dog who had once been trained for military service. Years ago on deployment, Ranger had saved Ethan's life during an ambush, absorbing shrapnel meant for his handler. Ethan had carried him to safety, and afterward, when Ranger was retired from service, Ethan had adopted him permanently. That moment had bonded them more tightly than words ever could. Ranger's presence was steady, quiet, and loyal, and for Ethan he was not merely a dog, but the last thread tying him to a world of purpose. On a late afternoon when the sky looked heavy with unfallen snow, Ethan was returning from town with supplies in his truck. He had made his usual stop at Miller's Hardware, a small family store run by George Miller, a man in his early 60s with thinning white hair and a patient smile. George was broad around the middle, always in a checkered shirt and suspenders, and had the kind of slow, considerate manner that suggested he preferred fixing things to arguing about them. He respected Ethan's privacy, speaking lightly of weather and tools, never pressing for more. Ethan appreciated that courtesy, offering nods and quiet thanks instead of conversation. After loading kerosene and feed, Ethan drove back toward the cabin, the road bordered by pines bending slightly in the wind. He saw them before he meant to. Two shapes lingering near the tree line just outside town, half shadow, half breath in the cold air. Ethan slowed the truck, instincts sharpening like a lens focusing. He recognized the breed immediately. German shepherds. The larger one, a female with golden black fur and sharp amber eyes, stood forward, shielding the second, a younger gray-flecked male who hovered close, uncertain. Their posture spoke even before movement did. Ears forward, but not attacking. Weight shifted to the back legs, ready to retreat. Bodies tense, not predatory. Ethan's heart gave a small, quiet jolt. He knew this stance. It was the trained defensive posture of dogs who had worked with people once. Military, perhaps? Law enforcement? Not wild. Ranger lifted his head from the passenger seat, ears pricking slightly, but body remaining calm, reading Ethan the way only a seasoned partner could. Ethan parked the truck farther down the road and stepped out slowly into the cold, his boots crunching lightly against frozen dirt. He did not call out. He did not advance. He simply stood still, hands at his sides, his body language deliberately neutral. The female shepherd stiffened, eyes locked on him, protective, calculating distance. The younger male leaned slightly against her, his trust dependent on her reaction. Ethan looked into their eyes and read the story written there. Not hostility, not wild hunger, fear layered with duty. These were not wanderers. These were abandoned soldiers. A memory rose uninvited, heat, dust, the ringing echo of explosions, orders shouted through radios, and through it all, Ranger's steady presence at his side, fearless because fear had no place while protecting his handler. Then the ambush, the blinding shock, the moment when Ranger threw himself forward, shielding Ethan with his own body. Blood, smoke, and a realization that loyalty could be stronger than survival. Ethan closed his eyes for a breath. Ranger had nearly died that day. Ethan had never forgiven the world for demanding that kind of devotion from a creature that only knew love and obedience. When he opened his eyes again, he saw the truth with clarity. "These are not wild strays," he murmured beneath his breath, the wind carrying the words away. "These are warriors who have lost their home." The female shepherd shifted slightly, head tilting as if trying to understand the shape of his presence. Her body language held training, scanning angles, assessing threat level, keeping the smaller one behind her flank. The young male's tail flicked nervously, stepping only when she moved. Ethan recognized the imprint of structured life, commands once given, routines now broken. He felt a quiet ache settle into his chest. That evening, Ethan returned to his cabin, but the image of the two shepherds followed him like ghosts. He set down supplies, lit the fire, and watched Ranger settle heavily onto the rug near the hearth. The cabin walls creaked softly in the cold like an old man sighing. Outside, the pines whispered in the dark. Ethan sat in the wooden chair he had carved himself years ago, staring into the fire until the flames began to blur. He remembered the men he had served with, the long stretches of waiting, the unspoken loyalty that bound a team. He remembered the farewell when Ranger was retired, the look in the dog's eyes. Loyalty did not retire just because the world said service was over. If the two shepherds had once worked alongside someone and were now alone, then they carried the same grief he did. The grief of purpose cut away too suddenly. The next morning was pale with weak winter sunlight filtering through the frost-veiled windows. Ethan stepped outside, breath fogging in the cold air, and Ranger padded beside him, walking with the slow dignity of age. The world was quiet except for the sound of wind in branches. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something stir that was not isolation or numbness. It was recognition. He knew now what the town could not yet see. Not beasts, not threats, just warriors without orders, loyal hearts caught between worlds. And Ethan Cole, once a man of missions, stood at the edge of the forest and understood that fate had quietly delivered a new one into his path, because he could not look into the eyes of lost soldiers, whether human or canine, and walk away. And in that moment, the man who had retreated from the world began, slowly, silently, to return to it. The storm of whispers swelled across Cold Haven like snow blown sideways by winter wind, gathering weight as it went. People no longer spoke of the two German shepherds as frightened animals hiding at the tree line. They spoke of them as danger, as threat, as a problem to be solved before something terrible happened. At the general store, at the diner, in the narrow hallway of the elementary school, the same sentence circled like a restless bird. Something must be done. Inside Marlene's diner, the morning felt heavier than the steam rising from coffee mugs. A group of townsfolk gathered at a corner booth beneath a wall-mounted clock that ticked with stubborn regularity. The air smelled of bacon grease and maple syrup, familiar comforts wrapped around unfamiliar fear. Among the customers was Calvin Briggs, Marlene's younger brother, a broad-chested man in his early 40s with a thick reddish beard and the kind of restless energy that made chairs squeak beneath him. Calvin worked lumber most of his life, outdoors through harsh winters, and hardship had carved impatience into him. He believed in solving problems directly, and fear made him blunt. "I'm telling you," Calvin said, his voice steady but edged like a blade, "those dogs are dangerous. Next time, it won't just be trash they're after." A few others nodded, relief found in certainty. Across town, the tension reached the school. Children had begun drawing wolves and warning signs in crayon, their young imaginations fed by adult anxiety. In the teacher's lounge, Principal Howard Jensen stood beside the coffee pot, rubbing his brow. He was a man used to solving practical issues, test scores, schedules, leaky roofs. Wild animals hovering at the edge of school grounds was not on his list of manageable tasks, yet here it was, unavoidable, like winter itself. And through it all, Anna Miller felt an ache that would not quiet. Anna, with her soft hazel eyes and careful step, had always listened more than she spoke. But this time, silence felt like betrayal. She had seen the truth in the dog's eyes. Fear, not fury. Desperation, not cruelty. So while conversation swirled louder and more urgent, she stood apart, gathering the courage to do what kindness demanded. That afternoon, Anna made a decision she had never expected of herself. She would go to the man in the woods. It took her 2 tries to drive up the narrow dirt road that led toward the forest cabin. The road felt like a line drawn between worlds, the world of voices and rumors below, and the quiet refuge of pines above. At the end of that road waited Ethan Cole. She had seen him only twice in passing at the hardware store, a tall man with the kind of quiet posture that suggested he had learned to carry weight without complaint. He was known as private, respectfully avoided. But when fear begins to shape a town, the heart sometimes leads where comfort would not. Anna drove slowly, hands tight on the steering wheel, the sky pale with winter light. Ethan was stacking cut firewood behind his cabin when he heard the engine. He paused, not startled, only attentive, and Ranger lifted his head beside the porch, ears pricking with calm alertness. Ethan stepped around the corner, boots crunching softly in the frost-bitten earth, and watched as the old sedan rolled to a stop. Anna stepped out, gathering her courage like a cloak. She wore a simple dark coat, her hair tucked into a knitted cap. The cold pinkened her cheeks. Ethan observed quietly, always a man who measured before speaking. Ranger came to stand at his side, relaxed but watchful. "You're Ethan Cole," Anna said gently, as if the name itself might spook him. "Yes," he replied, voice low, steady, not unkind, but reserved. "Can I help you?" She swallowed, offering a tremulous smile. "My name is Anna Miller. I teach second grade at the elementary school in town." If Ethan reacted, it was only inwardly. He had long distanced himself from the steady rhythm of classrooms and children's laughter. But he nodded politely, waiting. Anna continued, her words wrapped in sincerity. "I came about the dogs." The word hung there. Dogs. Ethan's gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly. "You've seen them?" "Yes," she said. "Near the school, near the woods, and I know most people think they're a threat. Some want them put down." Her voice trembled at the edges. "But I don't believe that. I think they're scared." Ethan studied her, searching for exaggeration or ignorance. He found neither, only truth shaped by compassion. For a moment, memories stirred again. Ranger bleeding in sand, loyalty refusing to break. The shepherd pair sheltering one another at the trees. Lost warriors. Anna's voice softened further. "They stand like trained dogs, like they're guarding, not hunting. The younger one seems injured. The older protects him." She paused, then spoke the words that had haunted her since the moment their eyes met. "They don't look at people with anger. They look at us like they expect to be hurt." Silence stretched between them, but it was no longer empty. Ranger stepped forward, nose lifting to catch Anna's scent, his demeanor calm, evaluating, dignified. Anna lowered her hand slightly in greeting without stepping closer. Ethan noticed the instinctive respect in her movement. She understood animals the way he did, approached nothing with force. "You're right," Ethan finally said, voice deep with reluctant acknowledgement. "They're not wild, they're trained, or once were." He exhaled slowly. "And yes, they're afraid." Hope warmed Anna's eyes. "I need help," she said, though the word tasted unfamiliar. "They won't trust anyone who only wants to chase them away, and I think they need someone like you." Ethan almost refused. The refusal rose from habit, from the quiet shell he had built after years of watching lives fracture. He had chosen solitude because it cost less. Helping meant reopening doors he had sealed shut with quiet, disciplined grief. Yet he thought of Ranger, sleeping peacefully by the fire each night because someone had stayed when it mattered. He thought of the two shepherds standing at the tree line like forgotten sentinels. And he thought of Anna, a schoolteacher with gentle eyes, who had driven up a lonely forest road, not to feed fear, but to challenge it. "Why you?" he asked softly. "Why care this much?" Anna looked toward the trees, her voice touched by old sadness. "Because I lost someone once, and afterward the world seemed colder for a long time. If I can spare another soul, even an animal, from being cast aside when it's already hurting, then I have to try." Her words were quiet, but they landed heavy. Ethan nodded, as though speaking to himself. "They are not monsters. They are soldiers with no orders, and soldiers without orders get lost." He did not say yes, but he did not say no. That evening, Ethan walked the tree line with Ranger at his side, watching for the shepherd pair. He carried no weapon, only patience. From the forest shadows came a flash of gold and black, then hesitant gray. The female stood guard, the younger leaning close, just as Anna had said. Ethan stayed still, his body speaking calm before his voice ever would. Behind him, unseen by the dogs, Anna watched from a respectful distance, hands clasped, heart held breathless. Trust could not be forced, but it could begin. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole allowed his guarded heart to lean toward the world again, not fully open, but no longer sealed. Because sometimes even the most wounded learn to listen when another brave soul whispers the truth. They are not evil. They are only afraid. And against the rising tide of fear in Cold Haven, that truth was the first light. The morning drifted in, pale and fragile, the sun nothing more than a soft smear of light behind a sky the color of pewter. Frost clung to every pine needle like tiny glass beads, and the ground held the brittle stiffness of winter refusing to leave. Ethan Cole walked along the border of forest and field with the slow steadiness of a man who measured each step, his breath forming faint ghosts in the air. Beside him moved Ranger, his aging German shepherd partner, his gait deliberate and dignified. Ranger's thick black and tan coat had thinned around the muzzle, revealing streaks of silver that told stories of years and service. His eyes, deep brown and thoughtful, carried patience, and the unspoken discipline of a trained K9 who had once answered every command with unwavering loyalty. Though he was older now, his presence still radiated calm authority. He did not rush. He moved like a soldier who understood that silence was a language and stillness a shield. Ethan had not brought Ranger by accident. He knew that dogs spoke to each other in ways humans could not. And if the pair hiding in the tree line truly were trained, then they would understand Ranger's posture, and perhaps that would be enough to open a door where words would fail. They reached the clearing near the elementary school where rumor had turned to fear, and fear had turned to talk of violence. The playground stood empty, swings creaking gently as wind nudged them. Farther back the forest loomed, not threatening, but vast and watchful. Ethan stopped. Ranger stopped with him, sitting calmly, his ears forward, but relaxed. They waited. Minutes passed, quiet as snowfall. Then, from the shadowed undergrowth, two shapes emerged. Luna stepped first. The female German shepherd carried herself with a kind of fierce grace, muscles taut, tail low but steady, amber eyes sharp and searching. Her coat was a rich tapestry of black and gold, though winter had thinned her frame slightly. She was not starving. She was enduring. Behind her hovered Scout, the younger male, gray-black fur dusted with pale streaks, his gaze uncertain. He stood close enough for his flank to brush Luna's, as though contact itself gave him courage. His body was lean, his hind leg still bearing the faint echo of an old injury that showed when he shifted weight. Where Luna radiated guarded strength, Scout radiated vulnerability wrapped in devotion. Ranger stood. Not suddenly, not threateningly. He simply rose with the slow, respectful poise of a veteran greeting fellow soldiers. His tail remained neutral, his ears lifted slightly. His stance said, "I am not your enemy. I understand you." Ethan did not move forward. He knew better. He kept his hands at his sides, palms open, his posture relaxed, offering the same silent message. Luna stiffened, reading everything. Distance, direction, intention. Her gaze flicked from Ranger to Ethan, then back to Ranger again. The forest wind rustled through the needles, whispering secrets overhead, and for a moment the world felt suspended, like a held breath. Ranger took one step, slow, measured, respectful. It was the kind of step only a working dog would take when approaching another trained dog. Shoulders slightly angled, head low, but not submissive, announcing presence while yielding threat. He paused, waited. Then another step. Scout pressed closer to Luna, unsure, his young heart racing beneath his fur. Luna shifted only enough to shield him, body forming a protective wall. She did not snarl. She did not advance. She simply anchored herself between danger and the one she loved. And in that still exchange, Ethan saw everything. He saw history carved into posture. He saw training etched into bone. He saw loyalty that bore the weight of loss. Ranger stopped within a respectful distance and lowered himself to sit. It was a gesture of trust, a promise. He blinked slowly, the way dogs do when offering peace. Luna's ears twitched. Scout lifted his head slightly, curiosity pushing through fear. Ethan's mind drifted, unbidden, to a memory buried beneath layers of silence. Heat, dust, a sky white with desert glare. Gunfire like thunder cracking the world apart. He remembered shouting commands, the acrid smell of smoke burning his lungs, the sharp metallic tang of fear held tightly under discipline. He remembered Ranger at his side, a living shield of muscle and devotion. Then chaos, an explosion tearing the ground open, and Ranger launching forward in one perfect, heartbreaking act of instinct. Pain, blood, the sound of world and heartbeat collapsing into one. Ethan remembered cradling his injured partner, refusing to leave him, whispering words he never told another soul. "You stay with me, I stay with you." Ranger had survived, but something inside Ethan had been altered forever, shaped into a fierce vow that no loyal creature under his care would ever be abandoned. Now, staring at Luna's stance, the unwavering protection, the refusal to yield even at risk to herself, Ethan recognized that same vow burning bright in her. "This isn't aggression," he whispered, voice low as wind through needles. "This is duty." Luna's eyes met his, and in them he saw exhaustion, hunger, weariness, and beneath all that, love. She adjusted slightly so that Scout remained shielded. Her muscles remained ready, but not to attack, only to defend. Ethan slowly crouched to make himself smaller, his movement deliberate, respectful. He didn't reach out. He didn't call. He simply stayed at ground level where harm felt less possible. From behind a fallen log, Anna Miller watched quietly, her heart steady, but her breathing shallow. She had followed at a distance, wrapped in her dark wool coat, knowing better than to intrude. Her hazel eyes were filled with hope and worry in equal measure. She understood enough to know that this moment was fragile, a delicate thread that could either weave trust or snap into fear. She clasped her gloved hands together and waited, completely still, letting Ethan and Ranger speak the only language that mattered here. Ranger leaned forward slightly and gave a soft exhale. Not a bark, not a whine. A simple breath meant to carry reassurance across the distance. Scout tilted his head. His ears flickered in uncertainty, then in cautious interest. Luna watched every movement. Seconds stretched. Finally, she took one step forward. It was tiny, barely a shift, but it was a choice. A decision that this human and this elder soldier dog might not be threats. Ethan felt the weight of the moment settle into his chest like a quiet ache. He understood now fully, not just with logic, but with soul. These were not wild creatures wandering blindly through the world. These were trained guardians who had lost their pack. Luna had taken command where humans had vanished. Scout followed not out of fear, but out of trust, so complete it anchored his every breath. They were soldiers without orders. Protecting each other was their last mission. Ranger eased himself down to lie fully, chin resting gently on his paws, signaling acceptance. Luna's tense line softened, only slightly, but enough for Ethan to see it. Her gaze drifted to him again, questioning. And in that silent question, Ethan found a mirror. He, too, had once stood alone at the edge of the world, unsure where to place his loyalty now that the battle was over. He, too, had built barriers not out of hatred, but out of pain. And like Luna, he had shielded what little he still had, even if that meant standing against the world. Understanding washed over him, a steady, resonant truth. He could not walk away, not now, not after seeing such devotion survive abandonment. As the sky dimmed into the muted blue of late afternoon, Ethan slowly rose, careful not to disturb the delicate peace unfolding. Ranger also stood, his tail giving the faintest, respectful sway. Luna did not retreat. Scout peeked from behind her, young eyes searching. And in that fragile connection, man, aging K9, abandoned guardians, something unspoken began to heal. Ethan Cole, who had once left the world behind, now stood between fear and innocence, and understood his path with absolute clarity. He would help them, not as charity, but as one soldier recognizing another. Because loyalty like this deserved shelter, and because Ranger's quiet memories whispered that some debts of the heart are paid forward, not back. The clouds rolled low over Cold Haven that afternoon, heavy with the promise of snow, as if the sky itself carried a quiet grief. The town moved slowly beneath the muted gray light, chimneys whispering threads of smoke into the chilled air. Ethan Cole stood beside his truck at the edge of the old pine road, the forest at his back and the silent neighborhoods of Cold Haven stretching ahead. His rugged brown jacket hung open over a faded navy sweater, and the winter wind tugged gently at the ends of his dark blonde hair. His face, weathered, serious, disciplined, softened only when his gaze drifted toward Ranger, resting calmly in the passenger seat. Today was not about training. Today was about answers. The first stop was the county records office at the far end of Main Street. The building was squat and brick, unremarkable except for the faded flag swaying lazily beside the door. Inside, the lighting was fluorescent and slightly too bright, humming softly like nervous conversation. Behind the counter sat Margaret Hilliard, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pinned neatly in place and glasses that perched delicately on the bridge of a kindly but cautious face. Margaret was the type of person who seemed born for quiet rooms and stacks of paperwork, calm, orderly, methodical. Life had shaped her into someone who believed rules kept grief from spilling everywhere. When Ethan explained that he needed to know who had owned the old house near the forest line, the one that Luna and Scout had been circling, she hesitated, searching his eyes as if weighing his intentions. Then she nodded slowly and began typing. The name appeared almost gently on the screen. Mark Turner, age 47, veteran, deceased. Margaret's lips pressed together, compassion rising like a shadow behind her eyes. She explained what she knew. Mark had been a former Army medic. He had settled quietly in Cold Haven after service, keeping mostly to himself, but neighbors spoke kindly of him. No wife, no children, only a pair of dogs he treated like family. She spoke with the respectful tone people use for those who carried invisible scars. Ethan thanked her, his voice low, and left before the silence became too heavy. His next visit took him along a winding back road lined with sagging fences and frost-kissed mailboxes until he reached a pale blue farmhouse with peeling paint and a porch that leaned slightly forward as though tired of standing. This was where Mark's cousin lived, the relative who had handled arrangements. The man who opened the door was Daniel Price, mid-30s, soft-featured and round-shouldered, with a complexion pale from too much indoor work and a nervous habit of wringing his hands. Daniel was not unkind. He was simply overwhelmed by life. A bookkeeper by trade, soft-spoken and wary, he looked like a man who had never quite believed he belonged anywhere. When he learned Ethan was there about the dogs, Daniel swallowed hard and stepped aside. Inside the living room, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. Daniel finally spoke, haltingly, about Mark. How illness had crept over him like winter fog, slow and unavoidable. How the hospital visits had stretched longer, leaving the dogs alone for days at a time. And how, when Mark died quietly in his sleep one cold autumn night, The responsibility of two large, highly trained dogs fell abruptly onto someone who had never owned so much as a goldfish. Daniel admitted, shame coloring his face, that he had panicked. The dogs, grieving and confused, had barked at strangers. They had resisted being moved. They had refused food unless it was laid near the front steps of the empty house. And Daniel, terrified of failing them and equally terrified of them, had backed away. He had told himself that someone would come for them, that they would move on, that dogs always did. But Luna hadn't moved on. She had stayed, because loyalty was a promise she didn't know how to break. As Ethan listened, something old and fragile pressed against his chest. He thanked Daniel quietly and left, stepping back into the thin winter air. Ranger climbed from the truck, tail swaying slowly, sensing Ethan's silent shift, that mixture of sorrow and understanding that only those who had loved fellow soldiers could carry. They drove next to the Turner house. The property sat at the forest edge, wrapped in quiet. A single-story place with weathered siding, shuttered windows, and a porch whose steps had been worn smooth by years of returning home. And there, near the front stoop, the earth was worn bare. Two oval depressions in the frozen grass. Bed-shaped spaces, places where bodies had curled together night after night against the wind. Ethan knelt beside them. He didn't need anyone to explain. This was not territory marking. This was homekeeping. Luna and Scout had stayed because they believed their duty remained unfinished. He rose slowly as the air shifted and the forest rustled. Luna appeared first, melting from shadow to daylight, cautious but no longer frantic. Scout lingered slightly behind as he always did, his trust anchored to her presence. Ranger stepped forward in that calm, neutral way of his, tail low, chest steady. The two visitors, the two guardians, 4 soldiers standing in the echo of one man's memory. Ethan spoke softly. "You were watching the house." Luna's ears turned toward him. "You were waiting for him." Her gaze, steady and aching, felt like an answer. He thought then of Mark Turner, a man he had never known, but somehow felt he understood completely. A medic who had spent his life mending others until the weight grew too heavy. A quiet soul who had left behind 2 hearts too loyal to wander. As dusk deepened, Anna arrived, wrapped in her long gray coat, cheeks flushed by the cold. Her gentle presence did not disturb the fragile peace. She listened as Ethan explained what he had learned, every detail simple, human, unembellished. Her hand pressed to her heart as the truth settled in like morning. "They weren't hunting," she whispered. "They were guarding." Ethan nodded. Guarding memory, guarding love, guarding a door that would never open again. That night the townspeople gathered in the modest wooden hall beside the library, lit by soft yellow bulbs that buzzed faintly overhead. Wooden chairs scraped. Voices murmured. Fear traveled faster than truth, but truth had arrived, and Ethan was ready to stand beside it. He spoke simply, the way people do when they carry weight instead of ego. He told them who Mark Turner had been. He told them what Luna and Scout had lost. He told them that loyalty did not die when a body died. Sometimes it rooted itself to a place, to a doorstep, to the scent of a coat still hanging behind a door. And slowly, faces softened. Even those who had shouted loudest grew quiet. Luna and Scout were not monsters. They were mourners. The snow began to fall outside, soft, hesitant flakes drifting through the lamplight, as if the sky whispered blessing upon a truth finally spoken aloud. When the meeting ended, Anna found Ethan near the doorway. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with a quiet, steady resolve. "So," she said gently, "what happens now?" Ethan looked toward the distant tree line where Luna and Scout would be curled together against the fading day. He felt the answer rise, not from duty, but from something deeper. "We bring them home," he said. not back to the past, but forward into a world where loyalty would no longer be left alone in the cold. And in that still winter evening, the story shifted, not toward fear, but toward promise. The storm arrived without thunder, only with wind, long, low gusts that slipped through the pines and bent them like bowed backs beneath a burden they could not set down. Cold Haven, already wrapped in winter's hush, seemed to draw tighter into itself. Porch lights flickered on earlier than usual, and the evening sky turned a deep, brooding blue as snow drifted slowly from clouds that hovered close to the earth. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the Turner property again, boots planted in the brittle frost, his breath white against the gathering dusk. Ranger waited beside him, silent and steady, as if standing watch on a forgotten battlefield. There was peace here still, but it trembled, delicate, uncertain, like the last note of a hymn hanging in the air after the choir had fallen silent. But fear, once seated, does not die easily. In town, voices had begun to harden. By the time the sun slipped past the treetops, Tom Ridley had gathered 3 other men inside his garage. Tom was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered from years working construction, his hands thick and cracked like old leather. Fear had carved lines across his weather-beaten face, and the memory of a childhood dog bite, a flash of teeth, a scream, a scar, had never really left him. His fear grew loud, and loud fear always searched for company. With him stood Caleb Morris, a tall, wiry farmer with windburned cheeks and a tendency to mistake stubbornness for courage. Next was Jerry Pike, short and round, with a red beanie pulled over thinning hair and a nervous habit of swallowing before he spoke. And finally Walt Brenner, a retired mechanic whose silence masked a lifetime of disappointments. None of them were cruel by nature, but fear, repeated, shared, and sharpened, had turned into resolve. Tom's voice carried weight in the small town. He spoke of safety, of children, of duty. He used words like protect and responsibility, letting them sink into the room like anchors. He did not know Luna's story. He did not want to know. Sometimes the truth feels like weakness when fear has already drawn its line. By the time they climbed into their trucks, rifles resting quietly in worn cases, the choice had been made. Back at the Turner house, the snow had slowed, drifting lazily as though reluctant to fall. The air smelled faintly of pine and distant wood smoke. Luna appeared near the porch again, Scout close at her flank. She moved with the same poised vigilance, every sense alert, every muscle poised to shield. Scout pressed nearer, his trust still tucked beneath her shadow. Ranger watched them with the deep, steady patience of an elder warrior. Ethan could sense the shift in the night, a subtle tightening in the world, the way a battlefield grows quiet seconds before everything breaks. Headlights cut through the dark. Engines idled. Doors opened. Boots touched frozen earth. Tom was the first to step forward. His jaw was set. His fear had been given purpose, and purpose gives men courage that feels like righteousness. The others fanned out slightly behind him, their shoulders squared in the way people stand when trying to silence doubt. Caleb's fingers twitched near the clasp of his rifle case. Jerry avoided meeting Ethan's eyes. Walt simply looked tired, as though some part of him had already begun to regret what had not yet happened. Ethan stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply placed himself between them and the dogs, his tall frame wrapped in a worn brown jacket, his eyes calm in the way storms envy. "Turn around," he said quietly. "Go home." Luna stiffened but did not advance. Ranger rose and moved to Ethan's side, sitting with perfect posture, his gaze locked forward, unblinking, unyielding, a sentinel carved from patience and loyalty. Tom shook his head. "You don't understand," he said, his voice strained, half anger, half pleading. "We're not here because we want to be. We're here because nobody else will do what has to be done." Ethan's voice remained steady, iron beneath the softness. "What has to be done is understanding." Behind him, footsteps approached softly over snow. Anna Miller emerged from the tree line, wrapped in her long gray coat, scarf trailing like a banner of gentle defiance. Her hazel eyes held calm fire. She moved to stand beside Ethan, not in front, not behind, but shoulder to shoulder, as equal as breath and heartbeat. "You're wrong," she said gently. "And you know it. Look at them. Really look." The men did, and for a moment truth flickered. Luna did not bare teeth. Scout did not charge. They simply stood close, two shadows pressed together, watching, waiting. But fear is stubborn. Caleb opened his rifle case. The metallic click that followed sliced the night in half. Ranger did not move. He did not bark. He did not growl. He only watched, eyes deep with a warrior's sorrow, the knowledge that danger was often a human invention. Ethan took one step closer, his boots crunching in frost. "If you raise that rifle," he said softly, "you will have to shoot through me first." The words were not a threat. They were an oath. Anna's voice did not tremble when she spoke again. "And me." The wind seemed to hush. Snow drifted slower. Two humans and one aging canine stood aligned, forming a quiet wall between ignorance and innocence. For the first time, Tom faltered. This was not what he had imagined, not wild beasts lunging from shadow, but loyalty meeting loyalty, grief recognizing grief. Jerry swallowed again, his breath fogging in the air like a confession he could not quite release. Walt shifted his weight, the rifle case suddenly heavy in his hands. Silence stretched. Then Ethan spoke once more, not as a soldier, not as a man hardened by war, but as someone who had seen too much loss to allow 1 ounce more. "They belong to a veteran," he said. "Mark Turner. He died. They stayed. Not because they're dangerous, because loyalty to them isn't a choice. It's a promise." The names, the truth, the story laid bare. It rippled through the men like a cold wind lifting the corners of a heavy curtain. Tom's shoulders slumped slightly. He thought of his own father, a stern, quiet man who had come back from service with eyes that never fully returned home. He thought of loyalty, of silence, of debts unpaid. His grip loosened. Caleb closed the rifle case. Jerry let out a shaky breath. Walt looked at Luna in a new way, seeing not a threat, but a guardian. The darkness that had gathered so confidently now hesitated at the edge of the lamplight, not banished, but weakened by truth. Ethan did not smile. He simply lowered his shoulders and placed one calm hand on Ranger's neck, feeling the slow, steady heartbeat beneath fur and scar. Anna exhaled. Luna blinked. Scout leaned against her gently, as though even he sensed a turning of the world. And for the first time in many nights, the cold seemed less cruel. Not gone, but softened. The men turned back to their trucks one by one, not defeated, but humbled, carrying with them the weight of realization that danger had never come from the dogs at all. It had lived inside their fear, and tonight fear had been asked to stand down. Morning returned to Cold Haven with a gentler kind of light, the kind that did not pierce, but instead laid itself softly across rooftops and pine branches. Overnight, a thin veil of snow had fallen, smoothing sharp edges and quieting the world. The town woke slowly beneath that pale sky, and for the first time in many days, whispers carried less fear. They carried curiosity, and perhaps, though no one would admit it yet, a hint of humility. Ethan Cole stood outside the Turner house again, his boots marking clean prints through untouched snow. His breath rose like smoke into the crisp morning. Ranger waited calmly at his side, steady as ever, the frost dusting his black and tan fur like silver ash. There was a task before them today, not one forged by orders, but by conscience. Luna appeared first, moving with her usual quiet discipline. Her sleek gold and black coat glimmered in the winter light, her muscles coiled with alertness. Scout followed closely as he always did, smaller, slighter, his gray-flecked fur ruffled by the wind. His youthful uncertainty lingered in his gaze, but now a fragile thread of curiosity followed it, trailing toward Ethan and Ranger like an invisible leash. Ethan spoke softly to them, his voice low and calm, then turned toward the truck. There was somewhere they needed to go. Word had spread quickly that Ethan was taking the dogs into town. People drifted toward the small training field behind the sheriff's office, an open stretch of snow-covered earth lined with wooden fences and an old flagpole that creaked softly when the breeze caught it. What gathered there was not a mob fueled by fear, but a crowd drawn by truth they had not yet fully understood. Among them stood Sheriff Dale Harper, tall and wiry, his weathered face unreadable, but his eyes steady. Marlene Briggs crossed her arms, stout figure wrapped in a thick winter coat, her blonde hair tucked beneath a knit cap, her mouth set in a line that mixed worry with reluctant interest. Even Principal Howard Jensen was there, posture square, hands tucked deep into his coat pockets. And Anna, kind, steady Anna, stood near the fence, her hazel eyes warm with unspoken hope. Ethan stepped into the center of the field with Ranger at his heel. Luna and Scout remained near the edge at first, hesitant shadows at the border between fear and trust. Ethan waited. Patience had become his language. He began with Ranger. A sharp, precise command flowed from his lips, not loud, not harsh, but crisp with authority. Ranger straightened immediately, every muscle aligning into perfect attention. Another command. Ranger pivoted, trotted, halted on cue, responding with the effortless grace of long-learned obedience. The townspeople watched, silent. Then Ethan turned his gaze toward Luna and repeated the same command. The change in her was immediate. Her posture lifted, her head rose, her ears sharpened. The wariness did not vanish, but beneath it, a memory awakened. A duty long carved into bone resurfaced, shaped by training and trust. Luna stepped forward, her movements mirroring Ranger's, controlled, practiced, almost ceremonial. Each command drew out another layer of discipline until the truth could no longer be ignored. This was not a stray. This was a trained K9, a veteran, a guardian. Ethan's voice softened as he continued, mixing gentle tone with firm direction. Scout watched, torn between uncertainty and admiration, his young tail drifting side to side in understated awe. Ethan shifted commands, simple, encouraging ones, and Scout attempted them, clumsy but eager, his youthful spirit trying to shape itself into something steadier. But it was clear. Scout had never finished learning. He was still becoming. A child soldier without a battlefield. The realization spread through the crowd slowly, like thawing ice. Sheriff Harper stepped closer, his blue eyes reflecting unspoken apology. They were trained, he murmured, more to himself than anyone. She protected him because that was her job. Howard Jensen removed his cap, rubbing the back of his neck with a sigh that carried both relief and regret. Even Marlene's stern expression loosened, her features softening as if a weight she had not recognized slipped quietly from her shoulders. Anna wiped a small tear from her cheek without shame. Ethan addressed the crowd not with speeches, but with quiet truth. "Luna served," he said. "And when her handler died, she didn't stop. She guarded what remained, the house, the memory, the only world she understood. Scout followed her because loyalty was the only language he knew." There was no accusation, only understanding. And in the chilly winter morning, something shifted in Cold Haven. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. People who had once whispered monster now began to whisper guardian, protector, family. Near the back of the group stood Elaine Carter, a middle-aged librarian with soft brown hair always pulled into a loose bun, thin wire-framed glasses perched on her thoughtful face. Elaine had lived alone since her husband passed from illness several years earlier. She rarely spoke much, but when she did, her words carried softness earned through grief. She clasped her scarf tighter and whispered to the woman beside her. They didn't leave because love wouldn't let them. Her voice trembled with recognition. The town listened. They truly listened, and that listening changed them. Children began to lean forward instead of away. Parents relaxed their shoulders. The once uneasy murmur of the crowd settled into stillness, the kind that comes not from fear, but from reverence. Luna stood poised and strong. Scout lifted his head, pressing gently against her shoulder, as though grounding himself in her certainty. Ranger sat calmly between them and Ethan, an elder sentinel bearing witness. A sense of family pulsed through the moment, invisible but undeniable. 3 dogs, 1 man, bound together not by ownership, but by a shared understanding of loyalty. The people of Cold Haven saw it, truly saw it, and the hardened edges of their hearts softened. The frost that had coated their judgments began to melt as quietly as morning snow slipping from pine branches. Later, when the crowd slowly dispersed, voices carried not fear, but compassion. Marlene spoke softly for the first time in days. "If they need food," she said, "I'll send it from the diner." Howard offered to adjust school safety rules, not out of necessity now, but out of trust that understanding had taken root. Sheriff Harper promised protection rather than pursuit. And Anna walked toward Ethan, her steps slow, as though approaching something sacred. "They're not just dogs," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "They're a family." The wind carried those words across the clearing like a blessing. Luna pressed her nose gently against Ethan's hand, not fully trusting yet, but acknowledging the bridge being built. Scout nudged Ranger tentatively, earning a calm, approving flick of the tail in return. Acceptance had begun, not with fanfare, but with quiet recognition that love sometimes looks like standing guard long after the world has forgotten why. And in that realization, Cold Haven's heart began to heal. The prejudice that once wrapped the town in ice loosened. The fear that had walked its streets began to fade, dissolving like morning mist over the snow-brushed fields. For the first time since Mark Turner's passing, something warm stirred in the air around his silent home. Not sorrow, not fear, but peace. And as snow continued to drift softly across the pines, it felt almost as though the land itself exhaled. The snow that had once felt like a shroud now lay across Cold Haven like a blessing, soft and gentle beneath the pale morning sky. Light filtered through the clouds in quiet beams, brushing rooftops, drifting over pine branches, and finding its way to the small cabin at the edge of the forest. Smoke rose from the chimney in a slow, steady spiral, the kind that spoke not of isolation anymore, but of warmth, of life, of return. Inside that cabin, Ethan Cole moved through the simple rooms with a steadiness that felt different now, as though some invisible weight had slipped from his shoulders during the night. His flannel sleeves were rolled slightly at the wrists, and his hands, once only used to mend fences and stack firewood, now rested occasionally on warm fur with a tenderness he did not try to hide. His quiet house had never echoed with laughter. It had echoed with memory. But today there was movement, breath, presence. Ranger lay near the hearth in his usual place, the aging shepherd curled with dignified ease upon a braided rug faded by years. His dark coat shimmered with silver, his eyes calm but bright, a sentinel at rest, yet always aware. Beside the wooden table near the window, Luna rested, her body finally loose of constant tension. The golden black of her coat caught every flicker of firelight, and her watchful amber eyes had softened, though she never strayed far from the doorway or Ranger's side. She had taken days to believe safety could exist indoors, but each hour had stitched new trust into her heart. And stretched out on a pillow near the foot of the bed, Scout slept on his back with legs crooked in the air, a puppy's peace reclaimed after too long in the cold. His gray-flecked fur rose and fell with deep, dreaming breaths. From time to time a paw twitched, not in fear now, but in the memory of running across open fields without worry. Ethan watched them. He was not a man prone to tears. War and loss had tempered him into stillness. But the sight of this mismatched, loyal family, breathing gently beneath one roof, stirred a quiet ache of gratitude in his chest. Somewhere in the silence, the memory of Mark Turner passed like a blessing, and Ethan felt, truly felt, that the promise of loyalty had been honored rather than broken. The decision had become official only the day before. He had walked into the sheriff's office, a building of creaking floors and old wooden desks, and filled out the paperwork with deliberate calm. Sheriff Dale Harper had stood nearby, tall frame leaning against the counter, his steady blue eyes warmed by respect. There had been a handshake, brief but sincere. "You'll take good care of them," Dale had said. Ethan had nodded, voice low. "I already am." Word traveled gently this time, not like rumor, not like fear, but like a story people were relieved to hear. At the diner, Marlene Briggs had wiped her eyes discreetly before turning away, pretending it was just the onions in the kitchen. Even Calvin Briggs, broad and once hard-edged, had allowed a small smile to crease his beard. Elaine Carter at the library had set aside a worn children's book about brave dogs, just in case she might read it aloud someday. Cold Haven had learned something. Fear could be loud, but truth, once seen, could be stronger. By late afternoon, Anna Miller walked the pine path toward Ethan's cabin, boots crunching softly across the snow. She wore a dark green coat that brushed her knees and a light wool scarf, her brown hair loose around her shoulders for once. Anna had always carried kindness in her eyes, but now there was something else there too. A steady warmth that came from knowing she had followed her heart and not turned away. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. A rare, almost shy expression that made him look younger than his weathered years. That smile had taken time to return to him. Time and courage, and a pair of dogs who refused to give up on love. Anna stepped inside, bringing the scent of winter air with her. Luna greeted her first, approaching with careful grace, pressing her head gently against Anna's hand in a gesture of chosen trust. Scout bounded forward without hesitation, still young enough to love completely and immediately, tail swaying in crooked joy. Ranger rose slowly and placed himself beside Ethan, not as guard now, but as companion bearing witness. Anna knelt, her hands resting softly in fur, and laughed, a sound like wind chimes stirred by a tender breeze. "They seem happy," she said, lifting her eyes to Ethan. "They are," he replied. His voice held something new, not sharp, not grim, but quietly alive. "And they're staying." Anna's gaze searched his face, understanding more than he spoke. She nodded, and the silence that followed was not heavy. It was warm. As days passed, rhythms formed. Luna patrolled the porch each evening before lying near the fire. Scout chased lazy flakes of snow until he tired, then collapsed in a heap of clumsy joy. Ranger observed them both with patient wisdom, occasionally nudging Scout into better manners, occasionally resting his chin on Luna's shoulder in calm solidarity. And Anna, though she still lived in her small house near town, began to visit often. At first she arrived with blankets and supplies, later with books, then simply with herself. She would brew tea in Ethan's simple kitchen while he stacked fresh logs beside the hearth. They spoke sometimes about small things, sometimes about loss, sometimes not at all. With each visit, the silence between them grew kinder. The walls of the cabin that had once echoed with nothing but wind now carried layered sounds: soft conversation, slow breathing, the gentle click of Ranger's claws across the floor, the light skitter of Scout's playful steps. Life had returned not with noise, but with presence. And slowly, something returned to Ethan as well. A smile, not forced, not rare, but real. Perhaps it came from the way Luna rested her head on his knee without flinching, or the way Scout trusted the world again, or the way Anna's eyes softened when she looked at them all together, as if witnessing healing felt like grace. Perhaps it came from knowing that loneliness had not been inevitable, only unchallenged. Whatever the reason, the smile stayed. Time passed, and the story of the two dogs who guarded a dead man's home transformed into a story of loyalty, redeemed. Parents told it gently to their children. Elders spoke of it at church steps and grocery aisles, not as warning, but as reminder. That love, even when misunderstood, is rarely a threat. Sometimes it is simply a lost traveler trying to find its way back. And so it became known in Cold Haven that the man in the cabin at the edge of the woods lived no longer in shadows. He lived in the quiet company of 3 dogs and the gentle presence of a schoolteacher whose kindness had refused to surrender to fear. Together, they formed something that did not require a name, only recognition, a home. And when winter nights grew long and snow dusted the rooftops like powdered starlight, townsfolk would sometimes pause beneath the pines and listen to distant laughter carried on the wind, a reminder that even the darkest stories can find their way into warmth. And so they said, quietly, almost like a prayer, "Not everything that frightens us is evil. Sometimes they are only hearts trying to find their way back home." In the quiet ending of this story, one truth rises like dawn over the pines of Cold Haven. Not everything that appears fearful is born of darkness. Sometimes God places wounded hearts in our path so that we may rediscover compassion, patience, and mercy. Luna, Scout, Ranger, Ethan, and Anna did not simply find one another by chance. It was as if a small miracle had been woven into their lives, reminding them that love does not abandon, loyalty does not fade, and faith often arrives wearing very ordinary faces. In everyday life, it is easy to look at what we do not understand and turn away. Yet the story whispers that perhaps God is closer when we choose kindness, when we defend the gentle, when we open our doors to those who are lost or afraid. It is then that the quiet work of grace begins. What once was fear becomes healing. What once was loneliness becomes home. So let this story live beyond the final page. May it encourage hearts to love deeper, judge slower, and trust that even in the darkest seasons, God is still guiding lost souls back toward the light. If this story touched your heart, share it with others so the message of compassion may travel further. Leave a comment to let the world know what this story meant to you. Subscribe so you do not miss the next tale of hope and faith. And if you feel moved, write the word Amen in the comments as a small prayer for all those still searching for a place to belong. May God bless every one of you who reads and listens, today and always.